So today I want to ponder something that I don't have the answer to. And I don't have the answer to many of the things that I ponder because I am not an insider. I have no firsthand knowledge of much of anything. I'm very, very far away from anywhere where real influence takes place. But I notice things, and I'm curious to talk. I notice I notice patterns. I guess is that what you say when you're autistic now? I notice patterns, and I don't think I'm autistic either. I'm not socially successful, but I'm also not autistic. I think I'd be more socially successful if I were more autistic because I would be less sensitive about social cues, and I'd be able to just plow through and say what I wanted to say without, thinking, oh, what effect is this having on people, and oh, blah blah blah, or anything like that. But anyway, that's a side note. Sorry, put that in brackets. What I just said. I'm thinking right now that there hasn't been an assassination in a long, long time, at least not in the Western world. I can't think of the last public figure who was assassinated, going back to, or that there was an assassination attempt on, even going back to Reagan and Pope John Paul II, which I think were right around the same time. I think the Pope was maybe a little bit before, but that was it. That was 1981, and ever since then, there have been no assassinations of really important public figures. There was the shooting of the congresswoman in Arizona. What's her name? Gabby Giffords. That was in 2013, I believe. And so there was that, and maybe there's something else that I'm not thinking of, some other event. But of really high-profile people, it used to be a very common thing, especially in the 60s and 70s. Somebody was running for president. You can be sure somebody was going to take a shot at him at one point or another. You had the big three in the 60s, of course. Well, there were the big three. There was King and the two Kennedys, but there was also Malcolm X. Don't want to leave him out. And going into the 70s, George Wallace, who was not it was not a successful assassination, but they did manage to paralyze him for the rest of his life. And I think there was an effort made on even Ford. Wasn't Squeaky Fromme of the Matt Manson family gang, if we believe the official story. Didn't she have a gun out and was going to shoot Ford, but it didn't work out. It didn't happen. So yeah, and then you had the very dodgy events with Pope John Paul I, who was elected and then died within a couple of weeks after being elected Pope. Still lots of questions about that, exactly what happened there with him, and then Pope John Paul II and Reagan. And then after that, it was like the assassinations just tapered off, and it became not a thing anymore. So what happened? Did security suddenly improve by leaps and bounds over what it had been up to that point? Did it really get that much better all of a sudden? Something else I want to include in my assessment here, because I think it is relevant to what I'm saying in a way. I watched it's been a while now, but I remember watching a documentary about the events that happened in Munich at the Munich Olympics in 1972, where a bunch of Israeli athletes were taken hostage, and there were. I remember that this documentary, was in this documentary they were showing on television how the police were sneaking up and were going to try to surprise the kidnappers, and then it turned out the kidnappers were watching everything on TV, so they knew it all was coming. And I was I remember thinking to myself when I was watching this, why did they allow television networks to broadcast this? And would that ever happen today? No, I am almost certain it would not. So was that just a function of how they just weren't as slick back then? They just didn't have it together quite so well. They weren't as organized. They weren't as streamlined. I don't know, but that was a really bizarre thing. And of course, the whole kidnapping of the Israeli athletes ended in tragedy. They were all killed. This was the event which started, which was featured in the Steven Spielberg movie Munich, which is a good movie, and I would recommend it. So around the early 80s, it just tapered off. I guess there were some foreign figures like, was it Anwar Sadat, who was assassinated in Egypt. I hope I'm getting that right, and I'm not mixing up somebody's name, but I know it was an Egyptian president. But it just seems like in the last 40 years, assassination has really not been a thing, and that's very curious. Why is that? And meanwhile, what has become a thing progressively up, starting in the 90s and moving up to now, what has become more of a thing is the mass shooter event. The active shooter, the person who supposedly has some kind of grievance or political agenda, or maybe he's just mentally deranged, or maybe he's just pissed off, as is written about in the book Going Postal. I can't remember the author of that book, but it was an interesting take on why so many workers, not just postal workers, but workers in general, who'd just been pushed, by management, pushed into humiliating work situations, and just weren't treated with dignity, and how they would snap. It was sort of giving a context for why these particular shooters were activated to do what they did. But then you have things like, just the mass shooter. Whether it's what were they called? The gas pump shooters, the Malvo and his nephew, who were black Muslims, or they were Muslims. They were black and they were Muslim, and they thought America was the great Satan, and they didn't like white people, so they were just taking pot shots at white people in Washington D.C., just random white people who were pumping gas into their cars. You had things like that, or the reverse, like what supposedly happened in Charleston and what recently happened in Buffalo. So plenty of things happen for racial, and of course they don't always have to be shooters. There was the driver of who ran into all of the people in Waukesha and killed many. There's the driver in Toronto who was said to be, an incel mass murderer, although there was, it was a bit more complicated than that. In any case, we've seen a rise in these kinds of events, mass shooting events, and a severe dip in assassinations and assassination attempts. Now, why is that? Like I said, is it just that somehow at around 1982, Secret Service and other security divisions, private security firms whose job it was to protect the lives of elected officials or whomever, did they just suddenly saw the way to do it in a way that was really much more foolproof than it had ever been before? Because before it was anything but foolproof. I mean, you had people getting important. I don't think they're important just because they're running for high office, but you know what I mean. People who are considered important, people who are names, and so forth. You saw them getting taken out all the time. And I'm only slightly exaggerating. Between 1963 and 1980, or 81, a span of 17, 18 years, it had gotten to be not so uncommon to hear about political figures being assassinated, or there being an attempted assassination. But after 81, it just ends. And then at some point, we have the mass shooter event. I guess, I don't have to list off all of the, and I wouldn't even be able to remember all of them. And they didn't all have, they say that it's often talked about as an American thing by anti-gun activists, but really it's not exclusively an American thing. It happened in France. It happened at the concert in 2015. It happened in Canada, in Quebec, sometime in the early 90s on a college campus with a guy who was pissed off at feminism. And so I guess I want to know why the mass shooting has replaced the assassination. And I'm not condoning either, of course, but I would say that if you are somebody who has an agenda, if you're a pissed off individual with a political agenda of some kind, why do you want to just go shoot a bunch of random people? How is that helping your cause? That's what I don't get, and that's what makes me, and I'm not even talking about the probable federal involvement in most of these shootings, including the assassinations. Maybe here and there was somebody who was an actual just I don't know. I'm sorry to laugh about this, but it does strike me as kind of funny. Like maybe there was an actual free agent amongst all of these first assassins and then just mass shooters. Maybe the vast majority of them were MK Ultra, activated agents, who just did what they were programmed to do. But maybe there was a time or two where you actually had free agent shooters who nobody was expecting to do what they did, and who just did it because it was what they planned. It was either because they had a screw loose in their minds, and that prompted them to be violent in a way that they wouldn't have been otherwise if their brain chemistry were normalized, or maybe they were people who actually wanted to accomplish something, but who did it on their own without being prompted by alphabet organizations or by sinister, nefarious deep state agents. I don't know. I would have to say though that if you're going to take part in a mass shooting, how do you expect that to help in any way? How does that help your agenda in any way? Even if the people you're shooting are people you don't like for whatever reason, because you don't like their race or you don't like their religion or some other reason, or you don't like their sex, you're mad at men, or you're mad at women, or whatever, or you're mad at gays, or you're mad at straights, or whatever. How is that going to further your cause? How does that work? It doesn't. Whereas with assassinations, you can understand it more. You can see why, if somebody is a public figure who's really important, and you feel that person is responsible for is evil and needs to be taken out, then it's much more understandable. Again, I'm not condoning it necessarily, but it's much more understandable in such cases. And so my question is, and I don't have the answer to this, and maybe some of you might have some ideas about this, so I'm open to suggestions. But why is it that we saw this decline in political assassinations, where the whole idea is, I hate the whole punching up, punching down metaphor, but I mean, you are punching up when you take a shot at a public figure, a president or a senator or someone else in the public eye who's got power. That is a punch up. I'm not saying I condone it, but technically speaking, it is a punch up. Whereas, I don't know, you're kind of punching sideways. You're just punching laterally. Again, sorry to laugh when lives are being taken, but really, if you're just some guy, some faceless citizen, and you just go out and shoot a bunch of faceless citizens, well, so what? What have you accomplished? What is that? I mean, I guess that some of the shooters have supposedly, if we can believe what we're told about them, and I question everything. I don't believe anything, just anything that we're told, just because you can't trust the government, you can't trust the media. But that aside, I know that ostensibly, in some cases, the idea was accelerationism, to make things worse, because the worse things get, the closer we get to some kind of civil war, and then we fight, and then there's some necessary violence that has to happen before we can have the kind of society that these people want. I know that's the philosophy. I find it repugnant. I find the whole idea of accelerationism repugnant on many levels. I want things to get better. I don't want things to get worse. I think if your idea is, let's make things are bad right now, let's make things super, super duper bad, and then it'll get better. It's just, who else believed that was Lenin. He was the one who said the worse the better. So I ain't no Leninist, and you shouldn't be one either. And that goes for both Vladimir and John, by the way. Speaking of assassinations, I forgot to mention his. Another one that was right on the cusp of when assassinations started to go out of style and mass shooting became the thing. So, thoughts, suggestions, ideas, please leave them below. I'm interested to hear what anyone has to say. and thanks for watching.